Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. I never believed in the stories they told about the Superstition Mountains until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams, I'm 34 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. The dream started 3 weeks before we left for Arizona. Every night, the same pale figure standing at the foot of my bed, its face obscured by shadow, watching me with eyes that weren't quite human. I'd wake up sweating, heart hammering, but I always told myself it was just stress from work. Corporate consulting had been eating me alive for months, and Sarah kept suggesting we take a trip somewhere remote to disconnect. "The superstitions are perfect," she'd said, scrolling through RV rental websites on her laptop. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us in the desert. Sarah Chen, my girlfriend of 2 years, was everything I wasn't. Spontaneous where I was methodical. Optimistic where I was cautious. She worked as a freelance photographer and had been pushing for an adventure that would give her new material for her portfolio. The 32-foot Winnebago she'd found seemed like the perfect compromise between her desire for wilderness and my need for basic comfort. We picked up our friends Jake and Amanda Morrison the morning we left Phoenix. Jake was my college roommate, a software engineer who'd been going through a messy divorce. His wife had moved out 3 months ago, taking half their furniture and most of his confidence with her. Amanda was Jake's younger sister, a nurse practitioner who'd volunteered to come along to make sure Jake doesn't drink himself into a coma in the desert. The siblings shared the same dark humor and protective instincts, though Amanda's were usually directed at patching up other people's mistakes. The first sign something was wrong came as we drove deeper into the Superstition wilderness. My GPS started glitching, showing our location as a blank gray area. Then Sarah's phone lost signal entirely, followed by Jake's and Amanda's. Only the RV's built-in navigation system seemed to work, but even that showed conflicting information about nearby roads. "Must be the mountains," Sarah said, adjusting her camera settings as she photographed the jagged peaks through the windshield. "All that iron ore interferes with electronics, but I'd driven through these mountains before on business trips. The interference had never been this complete. We found a campground marked on the RV's GPS, Lost Dutchman State Park Extension it was called. I'd never heard of an extension to the main park, but the coordinates led us to a well-maintained dirt road that wound between towering saguaro cacti and ancient volcanic formations. The site itself was perfect. Level ground, a fire ring, even electrical hookups that somehow still had power despite being miles from any visible power lines. That first night we grilled steaks on the campfire and drank beer under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Jake seemed more relaxed than he'd been in months, and Amanda actually smiled when Sarah convinced her to pose for photos against the desert sunset. For a few hours, I almost forgot about the dreams. Then, around midnight, I had it again. The pale figure stood at the foot of our bed in the RV's master bedroom, exactly as it had appeared in my apartment. But this time, when I blinked, it didn't disappear. It remained there, watching, its too thin frame casting no shadow despite the moonlight streaming through the window. Its face was a void beneath stringy, colorless hair, and its fingers, too long, too many joints, hung at its sides like broken branches. I tried to wake Sarah, but when I reached for her, my hand passed through empty air. I was alone in the bed. Alone with the thing that had been haunting my sleep. When I finally jolted awake for real, Sarah was beside me, breathing deeply. The clock read 3:06 a.m. Outside, I could hear someone walking around our campsite, slow, deliberate footsteps circling the RV. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window, but saw nothing. The footsteps continued for another 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. When I checked on Jake and Amanda in the fold-out bed, they were both sound asleep, undisturbed. The next morning brought our first real sign of trouble. Amanda woke up with 3 parallel scratches on her left arm, each about 4 inches long and perfectly straight. They looked like claw marks, but she insisted she must have scraped herself on something during the night. Maybe a loose piece of metal in the bed frame, she said, examining the wounds in the RV's bathroom mirror. I'm a heavy sleeper. Could have happened hours ago. But Jake and I had inspected every inch of that fold-out bed when we set it up. There was nothing sharp enough to cause those kinds of cuts. Sarah found the first symbol while photographing cacti near our campsite. Carved into the base of a massive saguaro, about 3 feet from the ground, was a pattern of intersecting lines that hurt to look at directly. The carving appeared fresh, the wood still weeping sap, but the design itself seemed ancient, angular and wrong in a way that made my eyes water. I've never seen anything like this, Sarah said, snapping photos from multiple angles. It's definitely not Native American. More like, I don't know, Celtic, but that doesn't make sense out here. Jake bent down to trace the symbol with his finger. The moment his skin made contact with the carving, he jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. Christ, that thing's hot as a branding iron, he said, sucking on his fingertip. But when Amanda checked his finger, there was no burn mark. No sign of injury at all. That afternoon, Sarah's camera started malfunctioning. Every photo she took showed our group of 4, but in the background of each image, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a 5th figure. Tall, pale, standing just at the edge of the frame. The figure never appeared in the same location twice, and when we turned to look where it should have been, nothing was there. Camera's probably overheating, Amanda suggested, but her voice carried no conviction. Desert sun, electronic sensors, maybe it's picking up some kind of light distortion. Except the figure appeared in photos taken inside the RV too, and in the shade, and at dusk when the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. By evening, we'd found 6 more symbols carved into rocks and trees around our campsite. Each one was different, but they all shared that same quality of wrongness, that sense of being dangerous to perceive directly. Jake started getting nosebleeds every time he looked at them. Amanda complained of migraines. Sarah became obsessed with photographing them, even though her camera kept showing that 5th figure lurking behind us. We should have left then. Packed up the RV and driven straight back to Phoenix. But we'd paid for 3 days, and Jake needed this trip more than any of us wanted to admit. Besides, where could we go? The GPS still showed our location as a gray void, and every road we'd tried that morning had somehow led us back to the same campsite. The second night, we all had the same dream. We were standing in a circle in the desert, holding hands, while something moved in the darkness beyond our vision. The pale figure from my nightmares stood in the center of our circle, no longer watching but actively reaching for us with those impossibly long fingers. In the dream, we couldn't let go of each other's hands. We couldn't run. We could only stand there while it touched each of us in turn, marking us with symbols that burned into our skin like brands. We woke up simultaneously at 3:06 a.m., all 4 of us gasping and drenched in sweat. And on each of our left arms, in the exact same location where Amanda had found her scratches, was a small mark. Not a cut this time, but a symbol burned into the skin. The same angular pattern from the saguaro cactus. "This isn't happening," Amanda whispered, staring at the mark on her arm. "This is some kind of shared psychosis. Carbon monoxide poisoning from the RV's generator, maybe, or..." But we'd shut off the generator before bed. And the marks were real, raised and tender like fresh burns. Jake was the first to break. He started laughing, a high, hysterical sound that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. "We're marked," he said, his voice cracking. "Just like in the dream. It marked us, and now we belong to it." "Stop it," Sarah snapped, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "There's a rational explanation for this. There has to be." That's when we heard the music. It came from somewhere deep in the desert. A melody that sounded almost familiar but played on instruments I couldn't identify. The tune was haunting, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, and it seemed to be calling specifically to us. Without discussion, we all began walking toward the sound. The rational part of my brain screamed warnings, but my feet kept moving. The music was lovely, and it promised answers to questions I didn't even know I'd been asking. As we walked, The landscape around us began to change. The familiar saguaro cacti gave way to plants I'd never seen before. Twisted, translucent things that glowed with their own pale light. The ground beneath our feet felt spongy, almost organic, and the air tasted of copper and ozone. We walked for what felt like hours, though my watch had stopped at 3:06. Eventually, we came to a clearing where the pale figure waited for us. No longer the shadowy presence from my dreams, but fully manifested in the moonlight. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its limbs unnaturally elongated. Its face a smooth expanse of white skin broken only by 2 black holes where eyes should have been. Around the clearing, dozens of other figures stood watching. They looked human at first glance, but wrong in subtle ways. Too tall, too thin, their heads tilted at angles that should have broken their necks. As my vision adjusted, I realized they were wearing the faces of other people like masks, the features slightly askew and held in place by what looked like crude stitching. "Welcome," the pale figure said, its voice like wind through empty houses. "We've been waiting for you." The marked ones, I understood somehow. We were the marked ones. The symbols burned into our arms were like tickets, granting us admission to this place that existed alongside the regular world, but separate from it. This was where the disappeared went, the missing hikers and campers whose cases were never solved. They stood around us now, wearing stolen faces and watching with empty eye sockets. "You don't have to be afraid," the pale figure continued. "The transition is usually peaceful. You'll keep your memories, your personalities. You'll just be improved." Amanda was the first to try to run. She spun around and sprinted back the way we'd come, but the landscape had changed. Where the desert should have been, there was only an endless expanse of that glowing, translucent vegetation stretching to the horizon. She stumbled and fell, and when she looked up, one of the face-wearing figures was standing over her. "The rules are different here," it said in Amanda's own voice, speaking through her stolen features. "Distance is negotiable. Direction is a suggestion. Time moves according to our needs." Jake began laughing again, but this time the sound was different. Deeper, more resonant, as if it were coming from somewhere else and just using his throat as a speaker. When he turned to look at us, his eyes had gone completely black. "Jake?" Sarah whispered. "Jake is still here," my friend said, but the cadence was wrong, the inflection foreign. "He's just sharing space now. It's actually quite comfortable, like wearing a well-fitted suit." That's when I realized the horrible truth. The symbols hadn't just marked us, they'd opened us up, made us accessible to whatever intelligence inhabited this place. The things we'd seen, the shared dreams, the synchronized experiences. We weren't just being watched. We were being prepared, hollowed out, made ready for new tenants. I could feel it starting in myself, a cold presence sliding into the spaces between my thoughts. It was patient, gentle even, like a doctor explaining a necessary procedure. Soon, I wouldn't be Michael Williams anymore. I'd be a puppet wearing Michael Williams' face, walking through the world and doing things I couldn't imagine while the real me screamed silently from inside. Sarah grabbed my hand, her fingernails digging into my palm hard enough to draw blood. "The RV," she hissed. "If we can get back to the RV." But the pale figure heard her. It tilted its head with predatory interest, and suddenly we were back at our campsite, standing beside the Winnebago as if we'd never left. No transition, no journey. One moment we were in that impossible clearing, and the next we were home. Except it wasn't home anymore. The RV's exterior was covered in symbols, the same angular patterns we'd found carved into the desert plants but now traced in what looked like dried blood. Every window glowed with that same pale, organic light we'd seen in the other place. "Time works differently here," the pale figure explained, materializing beside us without warning. "We can be in many places at once. The clearing, the campsite, the roads you drove in on. They're all the same location now. All connected, all ours." Jake, or the thing wearing Jake's body, nodded enthusiastically. "It's actually very efficient. No wasted motion, no unnecessary travel. Everything you need is right where you need it." Amanda was backing away from all of us now, her medical training warring with the impossibility of what she was witnessing. "This is a hallucination," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Shared psychosis brought on by environmental factors. Desert heat, dehydration, possibly ergot poisoning from contaminated food. The pale figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your mind is very orderly," it observed, "very rational. We'll enjoy inhabiting it." That's when Amanda made her choice. Instead of running or fighting or trying to reason her way out of the unreasonable, she did something none of us expected. She grabbed a piece of sharp metal from the RV's damaged exterior and drove it deep into her own arm, right through the burned symbol on her skin. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The pale figure shrieked, a sound that shattered every window in the RV and sent the face-wearing watchers stumbling backward. The landscape around us flickered like a bad television signal, alternating between the impossible desert and our actual campsite. "The marks," Amanda gasped, blood streaming down her arm. "The symbols are the connection. They're how it gets in." Jake's eyes flickered from black to brown and back again as whatever was inside him fought for control. "Amanda, no," he said in his own voice. "It hurts when you damage the marks. It hurts both of us." But Amanda was a nurse. She understood anatomy, understood how to inflict precise damage for maximum effect. She carved through the symbol methodically, even as the pale figure writhed and the stolen face watchers converged on our position. Sarah understood first. She found another piece of metal and began cutting into her own mark, screaming as the sharp edge bit through burned flesh. The pale figure's shrieks intensified, and suddenly we could see our real campsite superimposed over the nightmare landscape. Our actual fire ring, our actual picnic table, the real desert stretching away toward Phoenix. I grabbed the largest piece of debris I could find and started sawing at my own symbol. The pain was incredible, like cutting through live electrical wire, but with each stroke the other world grew more translucent, more distant. "Help me," Jake begged, his voice entirely his own now. "I can't do it myself. It won't let me hurt the mark." The thing inside him was fighting back, trying to reassert control, but Amanda's mutilation of her own symbol had weakened the connection. I carved through Jake's mark while Sarah held him down, both of us ignoring his screams of agony. The moment the symbol was completely destroyed, Jake collapsed. The pale figure and its watchers flickered like mirages and were gone. The organic landscape dissolved, leaving us alone in our real campsite under real stars with real pain and real blood soaking into real desert sand. We broke camp immediately, despite our injuries, despite the fact that it was 4 in the morning. The RV started on the first try, and the GPS showed our location correctly for the first time in 2 days. We drove straight to the nearest hospital, where Amanda stitched up our wounds and invented a story about a hiking accident that the emergency room staff pretended to believe. That was 3 months ago. The scars have faded, but they're still visible if you know where to look. 4 perfect lines where the symbols used to be, raised and pale against our skin. We don't talk about what happened in the superstitions. We don't speculate about what those things were or where they came from, or how many other people might be marked and waiting for collection. But sometimes, usually around 3:06 a.m., I dream of that other desert, the one where distance is negotiable and direction is a suggestion. In the dreams, I can see our real campsite from the outside, see our RV parked in the exact spot where the nightmare began, and standing beside it, patient and pale and impossibly tall, the figure waits. It's still waiting, still watching, still calling to the marks that aren't quite gone, despite Amanda's surgical precision, because some connections once made can never be completely severed. Last week, Sarah found a new symbol carved into the brick wall outside her apartment building. Jake's been having trouble sleeping, and Amanda's started seeing shapes in her peripheral vision that vanish when she turns to look. The marks want to heal. The connection wants to reestablish itself. And somewhere in the Superstition Mountains, in a campsite that exists in more than one dimension, the pale figure continues its patient work. We've been trying to warn people, in subtle ways, Jake's been posting warnings on hiking forums, disguised as casual advice about avoiding certain areas. Sarah's been researching other disappearances, looking for patterns, for other groups who might have encountered the same thing. Amanda's been documenting our symptoms, tracking the gradual return of our connection to that other place, because we all know, though none of us will say it out loud, that we didn't really escape. We just bought ourselves time. The marks are trying to reform, cell by cell, scar tissue by scar tissue. And when they're complete again, when the symbols have healed fully back into our skin, we'll be called home. Sometimes I wonder if we should have stayed. Let the pale figure complete its work and lived forever in that impossible desert where nothing ever really dies, where the missing become the watchers and pain is just another negotiable concept. But then I remember Jake's black eyes and the sound of wind through empty houses, and I know we made the right choice. Even if it's only temporary. Even if, in the end, all we did was delay the inevitable. The desert is patient. The pale figure is patient. And marks, once made, never truly fade. They just wait for the right time to show themselves again. Last night, I dreamed I was standing in our old campsite, watching the RV from the outside. Inside, I could see 4 people sleeping peacefully. Myself, Sarah, Jake, and Amanda. But we were different somehow. Our movements were too fluid, our smiles too wide, and when we turned to look through the window, our eyes were completely black. I woke up at 3:06 a.m. with fresh blood under my fingernails and a new symbol carved into the wall beside my bed. This one was different from before, more complex, more complete, more permanent. The pale figure is done waiting. It's time to come home. Story 2. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Sarah Rodriguez. I had just turned 32 when we arrived at the Owyhee Canyonlands in Idaho, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The old man at the gas station in Jordan Valley had strange clouded eyes that seemed to look right through me as he counted our change. His fingers, gnarled like ancient wood, hesitated over the crumpled bills. "You folks heading into the backcountry?" he asked, though we hadn't mentioned our destination. My husband Marcus nodded, checking his phone for the 100th time. No signal out here, just like we'd expected. Planning to find some of those hidden trails everyone talks about online. The old man's face darkened. Some trails ain't meant for the living. There's one out there. Appears only when death's near. Locals call it the dying trail. He leaned closer, his breath smelling of tobacco and something else. Something rotten. You see a path marked with white stones, you turn around. You hear voices calling you forward when the sun's setting, you ignore them. And if you meet someone walking toward you on that trail... He paused, studying our faces. Well, you won't be meeting anyone walking toward you. Not anyone living. Marcus laughed it off the way he always did when faced with anything that couldn't be explained by his engineering degree. Thanks for the local color, Pops. We'll be careful. But I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. We'd driven our renovated Airstream out here for our 10th wedding anniversary, looking for adventure away from our suffocating suburban life in Portland. Marcus had been working 18-hour days at his firm, and I'd been drowning in the monotony of my marketing job. We needed this. Time together, away from everything. The Owyhee Canyonlands stretched before us like an alien landscape. All red rock formations and endless sagebrush under a sky so big it made you feel like an ant. We'd researched the area obsessively, poring over topographical maps and satellite images, looking for the perfect spot to park our RV where we could hike during the day and stargaze at night. What we found was better than perfect. The dirt road we followed seemed to go on forever, winding deeper into the canyon country until we lost sight of any other human presence. When we finally stopped, it was at a natural clearing surrounded by towering red cliffs, with a seasonal creek running nearby. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no aircraft, just the whisper of wind through sage. "This is it," Marcus said, stepping out of our truck and stretching. "This is exactly what we needed." I nodded, but something felt off. The landscape was beautiful, yes, but there was an emptiness to it that went beyond the normal isolation of wilderness. It felt hungry. We spent the first day setting up camp and exploring the immediate area. The creek was perfect for filtering water, and the cliffs provided shelter from wind. Marcus was in his element, consulting his GPS and marking waypoints, planning hikes for the coming days. That first night we sat outside the RV roasting marshmallows over our portable fire pit, marveling at stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Marcus pointed out constellations while I listened to the absolute quiet of the desert night. No city noise, he said contentedly. No neighbors, no deadlines, just us. I smiled and leaned against him. But as the fire died down, I became aware of something else in the silence. Not quite a sound, more like the memory of a sound. Like distant voices carried on wind that wasn't there. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Marcus cocked his head. "Hear what?" I listened again, but there was nothing. "Never mind, I'm just tired." The second day, we hiked up into the cliffs, following game trails and scrambling over boulders that looked like they'd been placed by giants. The views were spectacular, endless vistas of canyon country stretching to the horizon. But as we climbed higher, I noticed something strange. "Marcus, look at this." I was crouched beside what looked like a trail marker, a cairn of white stones stacked about 3 feet high. But it wasn't on any of our maps, and the trail it marked didn't appear on our GPS. "Probably just left by other hikers," Marcus said, but he frowned as he studied his device. "Though I'm not showing any established trails in this direction." The white stones seemed to glow in the afternoon sun, almost luminescent against the red rock. They were perfectly round, worn smooth like river stones, though we were miles from any permanent water source. "Should we follow it?" I asked, though something in my gut was screaming at me to turn around. Marcus checked his watch. "It's getting late, maybe tomorrow." But as we descended back to camp, I kept looking over my shoulder at those white stones. They seemed to watch us go. That night, the voices came back. This time, Marcus heard them too. We were lying in our RV, the windows open to let in the cool desert air, when the sound drifted through the darkness. Distant, unintelligible, but definitely human voices. Multiple voices, as if a group of people were having a conversation somewhere out in the canyon. "Other campers?" I whispered. Marcus was already reaching for his flashlight. "Doesn't make sense. We would have seen their fire." He played the beam out through the window, sweeping it across the clearing and up toward the cliffs. Nothing. The voices continued for maybe 10 minutes, then faded until we couldn't be sure we'd heard anything at all. "Sound carries weird in the desert," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Could be coming from miles away." Neither of us slept well that night. The third day, we went looking for the source of the voices. We hiked back up to the white stone cairn, and this time Marcus agreed to follow the trail it marked. The path was faint but definite, winding between massive boulders and along narrow ledges that offered heart-stopping views of the canyon below. The white stones appeared every 100 yards or so, always perfectly placed, always glowing with that strange inner light. "This is really well marked for an unofficial trail," Marcus observed. "Someone put a lot of work into this." The higher we climbed, the more wrong everything felt. The air grew thin, but not in the normal way of altitude. It felt empty, devoid of something essential. And the silence was absolute. No bird songs, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the brush. "When's the last time you saw a lizard?" I asked. "Or heard a bird?" Marcus paused, looking around. "Now that you mention it," he checked his GPS again, frowning. "That's weird. I'm not getting any satellite lock here." The device showed nothing but static where our location should have been, as if we'd somehow moved beyond the reach of the satellites themselves. "Maybe it's the cliffs," I suggested, though we'd had perfect signal just an hour before. We followed the trail for another 2 hours, climbing steadily through landscape that grew stranger by the mile. The red rock gave way to something darker, almost black, and the white stone markers became more frequent. Some were stacked higher now, 4 or 5 feet tall, and they were arranged in patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. It was Marcus who spotted the cave. "Sarah, look at this." It was a natural opening in the cliff face, about 8 feet high and perfectly round. But what made it remarkable were the dozens of white stones arranged around its entrance in concentric circles, like ripples in a pond. "We should go in," Marcus said, and I realized with alarm that his voice sounded different, flat, emotionless. "Marcus, no, we should head back. It's getting late." But he was already walking toward the cave entrance, his movements stiff and mechanical. I hurried after him, grabbing his arm. "Marcus, stop!" He turned to look at me, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the man I'd been married to for 10 years. His eyes were vacant, unfocused, like he was looking at something far away. "Don't you hear them calling?" he asked in that flat, strange voice. "They're waiting for us." I couldn't hear anything except my own pulse thundering in my ears. I pulled harder on his arm, and after a moment he seemed to snap back to himself. What were we doing?" He looked around, confused. "How did we get here? You don't remember walking to the cave?" He stared at the entrance, then at the white stones surrounding it, and I saw fear creep into his expression. "We need to leave. Now." We practically ran back down the trail, not stopping until we reached our campsite as the sun was setting. Neither of us spoke about what had happened at the cave, but I could see Marcus was shaken. That night, the voices were louder and closer. They started around midnight, drifting through our RV like whispers in a language I almost but not quite understood. Marcus was deep asleep beside me, but the voices made my skin crawl. I lay there listening, trying to make out words, when I realized they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from Marcus. He was murmuring in his sleep, his lips moving in sync with the distant voices I'd been hearing. But the language wasn't English, wasn't any language I recognized. It sounded ancient, guttural, like words carved from stone. I shook him awake. "Marcus! Marcus, wake up!" He sat up, gasping, his eyes wild. What's wrong?" "You were talking in your sleep, in some other language." He stared at me, and in the dim light filtering through our windows, I could see confusion and something like terror in his expression. "I don't remember dreaming," he said quietly, "but I feel like I've been walking for hours." The fourth day, Marcus insisted we pack up and leave. "This place is getting to us," he said as he hitched the RV to our truck. "We're both having weird experiences. Maybe it's the altitude, or some kind of gas seeping from the rocks." I wanted to agree, wanted nothing more than to put miles between us and those white stone markers. But as Marcus started the engine, I realized we had a problem. The dirt road we'd followed to reach this spot was gone. Not impassable, not washed out. Gone. Where yesterday there had been clear tire tracks leading back toward the main road, now there was nothing but unbroken sagebrush and scattered rocks. "That's not possible," Marcus said, walking back and forth across the area where the road should have been. "We followed a clear trail in here. There were tire tracks." I checked my phone, desperate for GPS guidance, but still no signal. Marcus's device showed the same static. "Maybe we're confused about the direction," I suggested, though I knew we weren't. The cliffs formed a distinctive landmark, and I'd been careful to note our route. We spent hours searching for any trace of the road that had brought us here, driving our truck in widening circles around the campsite. But it was as if the path had simply been erased from existence. As afternoon turned to evening, we had to accept the impossible. We were trapped. That night, the voices didn't wait for darkness. They started at sunset, emanating from the cliffs around us like a choir of the damned. But this time, I could understand them. "Come home," they whispered. "Come home to us." Marcus heard them too. I could see it in his face, the way his eyes tracked toward the sound. And as the voices grew louder, he began to walk toward the cliffs. "Marcus, don't!" But he was already 20 yards away, moving with that same mechanical gait I'd seen at the cave. I ran after him, but he was faster now, almost floating across the rocky ground. The white stone trail was glowing in the twilight, each marker burning like a beacon. Marcus followed it unerringly, climbing higher into the cliffs as the voices grew to a roar that seemed to come from inside my own skull. I followed him all the way back to the cave. The entrance was different now, wider, darker, and from its depths came a light that hurt to look at directly, a phosphorescent glow that made the air itself seem thick and toxic. Marcus walked straight toward it. "Sarah," he called over his shoulder, but his voice wasn't his own. It was layered, harmonized as if a dozen people were speaking through his mouth. "Sarah, don't you want to come home?" That's when I saw them. Figures emerging from the cave entrance, pale and elongated, walking in that same mechanical way. They looked human at first glance, but wrong in ways my mind struggled to process. Too tall, joints bending in impossible directions, faces that were almost familiar but shifted when I tried to focus on them. And leading them was a woman who looked exactly like me. Not similar, identical. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same scar on my left hand from when I'd cut myself making dinner 5 years ago. She smiled at me with my own face and spoke with my own voice. "I've been waiting so long for you to find the trail," she said. "We all have." Behind her, more figures emerged from the cave. I recognized them all, even though I'd never seen them before. The old man from the gas station, decades younger. A family in hiking gear that looked like it belonged in the 1970s. A group of teenagers in clothing I couldn't place. And further back, shapes that might once have been human, but were now something else entirely. "The trail only appears for those who are ready," my doppelganger continued. "Those who are dying inside, even if their bodies don't know it yet. You've been walking the trail your whole life, Sarah. This is just the first time you've seen it." Marcus was almost to the cave entrance now, and I realized the truth. This wasn't happening to us. This was what we'd been walking toward all along. Every fight, every year of growing apart, every moment of quiet desperation in our suburban life, it had all been leading us here, to this trail that appeared only for the dying. "Marcus!" I screamed, putting everything I had into his name. He stopped just at the threshold of the cave, swaying like a man on the edge of a cliff. For a moment, the voices fell silent. "Sarah?" he said in his own voice, confused and frightened. "Sarah? Where are we?" The other me smiled sadly. "He's fighting it. They always do at first. But the trail is patient. It's been here longer than these mountains, and it will be here long after they've worn away to dust." I could see Marcus struggling, his face cycling between his own expression and that vacant, mechanical look. The figures from the cave were getting closer, and I realized they cast no shadows despite the blazing light from within. "You can't have him," I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. The other me tilted her head, amused. "I'm not taking anything. The trail calls and he's already answered. Look at him, Sarah. Really, look at him." I did, and saw what I'd been trying to ignore for months. The way Marcus had been pulling away from me, from life itself. The long silences at dinner. The nights he'd stay up staring at nothing. The way he'd stop talking about the future, as if he couldn't imagine having one. We'd both been dying inside for years. The trail hadn't brought us here. We'd found it because we were already lost. "But it doesn't have to end," the other me said gently. "The trail leads somewhere beautiful, somewhere peaceful. No more struggling, no more pain. Just rest." For a moment, I was tempted. The light from the cave was warm, inviting. The voices had turned melodic, comforting. It would be so easy to take Marcus's hand and walk forward into that glow. But then I thought about our first date, the way he'd laughed at my terrible jokes. Our wedding day, dancing to a song we'd both forgotten the name of. The morning he'd brought me coffee in bed after I'd been up all night sick with flu. Small moments, but real ones. Proof that we'd been alive once, even if we'd lost our way. "No," I said. The other me's expression hardened. "The trail has already claimed him. Look." Marcus was moving toward the cave again, but slower now, like he was walking underwater. The light was pulling him in, and I could see his resistance weakening with each step. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Not toward the cave, but away from it. Back down the trail of white stones. Behind me, I heard the other me scream. A sound like wind through broken glass. The voices rose to a crescendo. angry now, demanding. But I kept running, stumbling over rocks, sliding down scree slopes, following the white stones back toward our campsite. And as I ran, I called Marcus's name, putting every memory, every moment of love and life and stupid human joy into the sound. Marcus, remember the coffee shop where we met? Remember teaching me to drive stick shift? Remember the way we laughed when the ceiling leaked on our first apartment? I was crying now, sobbing as I ran, but I kept calling out every shared memory I could summon. The time we got lost in Seattle and ended up discovering that amazing Thai restaurant. The way he'd held me when my father died. The afternoon we'd spent hours assembling IKEA furniture and somehow made it fun. Remember us, I screamed into the desert night. Remember who we really are. I reached the bottom of the trail just as the voices cut off abruptly. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. I turned around expecting to see the glowing cave, the figures, the other me. But there was nothing. Just empty desert and star-filled sky. I waited there until dawn, sitting on a boulder with my knees pulled to my chest, watching the trail for any sign of Marcus. The white stones were still there, but they looked ordinary now, like any other rocks scattered across the landscape. As the sun rose, I heard footsteps. Marcus emerged from behind a cluster of boulders looking exhausted and confused. His clothes were torn, his face scratched, but he was himself again. I could see it in his eyes. Sarah? He looked around, disoriented. How did I get here? I remember hiking up to that cave and then nothing. It's like I lost the whole night. I ran to him, throwing my arms around him so hard it knocked him backward. He was solid, warm, real. But when I looked over his shoulder, I could see the white stones still gleaming in the morning light, patient as death itself. We need to leave, I said. Right now. We packed our RV in record time, barely stopping to secure our gear. And when we drove away from that clearing, the dirt road was back, clear tire tracks leading exactly where they were supposed to go. We didn't talk about what had happened until we were 100 miles away, stopped at a truck stop with fluorescent lights and the comforting noise of civilization. Even then, we spoke in whispers, as if saying the words too loudly might call something back to us. I remember walking toward a light, Marcus said, staring into his coffee cup. It felt peaceful, like everything that hurt could just stop. I nodded, understanding. We've been dying for a while, haven't we? Not physically, but yeah. He reached across the table and took my hand. God, Sarah, when did we stop living? We spent the next 3 days driving home, really talking for the first time in months, about work, about dreams we'd abandoned, about the life we'd built that had somehow become a cage. It wasn't easy. Some conversations left us both in tears, but for the first time in years, it felt like we were moving towards something instead of just existing. We sold the RV when we got back to Portland, started marriage counseling. I quit my marketing job and went back to school for art therapy. Marcus scaled back his hours and took up rock climbing, something that scared him, which was exactly the point. But sometimes late at night I still hear the voices, faint and distant, like radio signals from another world. They're always calling the same thing, come home to us. And sometimes I'm tempted to listen, because the trail is still out there, somewhere in the Owyhee Canyon lands, still marked with white stones that glow in the setting sun, still waiting for the dying to find their way home. The old man at the gas station was right about one thing. Some trails aren't meant for the living. But he was wrong about something else. The trail doesn't just appear for those who are dying. It appears for those who have forgotten how to live. And if you're not careful, if you don't remember who you really are, who you've chosen to love, what makes you human, it will teach you the difference between the two. The hard way. I never believed in the stories they told about cursed places until what happened to me out there. But now I know the truth. The most dangerous trails aren't the ones that lead through dangerous country. They're the ones that lead through the dangerous places in our own hearts. And once you've walked that trail, once you've seen how easy it would be to just stop, you never really leave it behind. You just learn to walk in the other direction. Most days, that's enough. Most days. Story 3. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from the Ouachita Mountains. I'm Marcus Fletcher, and I was 34 when I learned that some fires aren't meant to be extinguished. What happened during that RV trip through Arkansas still wakes me up at night, and I swear I can smell that sweet, acrid smoke seeping through my bedroom walls. It started innocently enough. My wife, Elena, and I had been planning this getaway for months. A chance to disconnect from our hectic lives in Little Rock and explore the remote wilderness of the Ouachita National Forest. We'd rented a modest 26-foot Class C motorhome. Nothing fancy, but it had everything we needed. A small kitchen, a dinette that converted to a bed, and enough storage for a week's worth of supplies. Elena had been struggling with insomnia since her mother's death 6 months earlier. The grief counselor suggested a change of scenery might help. Somewhere peaceful where she could process her emotions without the constant reminders of home. The Ouachitas seemed perfect. Dense forests, winding mountain roads, and plenty of isolated camping spots where the only sounds would be wind through the pines and the distant call of night birds. We left on a crisp October morning. The RV loaded with camping gear, enough food to last a week, and Elena's collection of her mother's old photo albums. She'd been going through them obsessively lately, as if searching for some message hidden in the faded images. I worried about her, but I hoped this trip would give her the closure she needed. The drive through Arkansas was beautiful. Rolling hills covered in autumn foliage stretched endlessly in every direction, and the further we got from civilization, the more relaxed Elena seemed to become. She even smiled when we stopped for lunch at a small diner in Mena, where the locals eyed our RV with friendly curiosity. "You folks heading up to the forest?" asked our waitress, a weathered woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "That's the plan," I replied, cutting into my chicken fried steak, looking for somewhere quiet to set up camp for a few days. The woman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a shadow crossing her features. "You be careful up there. Lots of strange things happen in those mountains this time of year." Elena looked up from her salad. "Strange how?" "Oh, probably nothing." The waitress waved her hand dismissively, but her eyes remained serious. "Just old stories. Local folklore, you know. Every small town has its legends." She refilled our coffee cups and moved on to another table, but not before adding quietly, "If you do camp up there, make sure your fire's completely out before you sleep. Some fires in those woods, they don't like to die." We laughed about it as we got back on the road, chalking it up to small-town superstition. But now, looking back, I wish we'd paid more attention to the fear in that woman's eyes. The Ouachita National Forest stretched out before us like something from another world. Towering pines and hardwoods created a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The road wound deeper into the mountains, past babbling creeks and moss-covered boulders that looked like sleeping giants. We found our campsite around 4 in the afternoon, a small clearing beside a creek about 15 miles from the nearest paved road. The spot was perfect. Level ground for the RV, a natural fire ring made of blackened stones, and complete privacy. The closest neighbors were miles away, exactly what we'd been hoping for. As I leveled the RV and connected our water and electrical hookups, Elena explored the immediate area. She called out excitedly when she discovered a small waterfall about 50 yards downstream, where the creek tumbled over a ledge of weathered limestone into a crystal-clear pool. "It's beautiful, Marcus," she shouted back to me, like something out of a fairy tale. I was happy to hear genuine joy in her voice for the first time in months. Maybe this trip would be exactly what she needed. We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up camp and preparing for our first night in the wilderness. Elena arranged her mother's photo albums on the dinette table, while I gathered firewood from the abundant fallen branches scattered throughout the forest. The wood was dry and would burn well, and I built up a substantial pile near the natural fire ring. As evening approached, I started our campfire. The kindling caught immediately, and soon we had a cheerful blaze crackling in the stone circle. Elena emerged from the RV with 2 glasses of wine and settled into one of our camp chairs. "This is perfect," she said, taking a sip and gazing into the flames. "I can't remember the last time I felt this peaceful." I leaned back in my own chair, listening to the symphony of night sounds beginning to emerge from the forest. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted its haunting call, and the creek continued its gentle murmur over the rocks. The fire popped and hissed as resin pockets in the pine logs ignited, sending showers of golden sparks dancing up into the star-filled sky. We talked quietly about everything and nothing, plans for the rest of the week, memories of better times, dreams for the future. Elena seemed more like her old self than she had in months, and I allowed myself to hope that we were finally turning a corner in our grief. Around 10 o'clock, we decided to turn in for the night. I used a bucket of creek water to douse the fire, watching as the flames hissed and died, leaving only glowing embers that quickly faded to black. Steam rose from the wet ashes, carrying the sharp smell of extinguished wood smoke. "Fire's out," I announced, following Elena into the RV. We converted the dinette into our bed and settled in for the night. Elena fell asleep quickly for the first time in months, her breathing deep and regular beside me. I lay awake a while longer, listening to the forest sounds and feeling grateful for this small reprieve from the darkness that had shadowed our lives. I must have dozed off around midnight because I was awakened by an odd crackling sound coming from outside. At first, I thought it might be the RV's refrigerator cycling on, but the sound was too organic, too familiar. It sounded like a campfire. I slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Elena, and peered through the small window above the dinette. What I saw made no sense. Our fire ring was blazing again, flames dancing merrily among the charred logs as if I'd never put it out. My first thought was that I'd done a poor job extinguishing it, that some ember had remained hidden and reignited the wood. It happened sometimes with inexperienced campers, though I'd always prided myself on being thorough about fire safety. I pulled on my jeans and shoes and stepped outside to deal with it properly this time. The fire was burning exactly as it had hours earlier. Same height, same intensity, same cheerful crackling. But as I approached with another bucket of creek water, something made me pause. The logs were wrong. I stared at the fire ring, trying to process what I was seeing. These weren't the same logs I'd been burning earlier. The wood was different, darker, older-looking, with an odd greenish tinge to the bark. And there was something else, something that made my skin crawl. The flames themselves seemed wrong somehow, burning with colors that shifted from orange to deep red to something almost purple at the edges. I doused the fire again, more thoroughly this time, stirring the ashes with a stick to make sure no embers remained. The flames died reluctantly, seeming to cling to the wood longer than they should have. When I was satisfied that every last coal had been extinguished, I went back inside. "Everything okay?" Elena mumbled sleepily. "Fire flared up again," I whispered. "Probably didn't put it out completely the first time. Go back to sleep." But I lay awake for another hour, listening for the sound of crackling flames. When it didn't come, I finally allowed myself to drift off. I woke to the smell of smoke. Gray morning light filtered through the RV's windows, and I could hear Elena moving around in the small kitchen area, making coffee. But underlying the rich aroma of brewing coffee was another scent, the unmistakable smell of wood smoke. I bolted upright and looked out the window. The fire was burning again, as if it had never been put out. Elena noticed my expression and followed my gaze. "Did you start it this morning?" she asked. "No." I pulled on my clothes and headed outside, Elena close behind me. We stood at the edge of the fire ring, staring at the impossible flames. The logs were different again. These were definitely not from my wood pile. They were massive things, easily twice the size of anything I could have lifted, with bark that looked almost scaly in the morning light. "This is weird," Elena said, voicing what we were both thinking. I grabbed a long stick and poked at the burning logs, trying to understand what I was seeing. The wood felt solid enough, but when I tried to roll one of the larger pieces over, it crumbled into ash and what looked like bone fragments. "Maybe someone's playing a prank on us," Elena suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. I looked around at the dense forest surrounding our campsite. We were miles from the nearest road, and I'd heard no vehicles during the night. The idea that someone would hike through miles of wilderness just to mess with our campfire seemed ridiculous. Still, I went through the motions of putting out the fire again, using even more water this time and stirring the ashes until they were cold mud. We ate breakfast in relative silence, both of us stealing glances at the dead fire ring. I decided to explore the area more thoroughly, hoping to find some rational explanation. Elena wanted to come with me, but I convinced her to stay at the campsite and go through her mother's photo albums. She'd been avoiding them since we arrived, and I thought it might be good for her to finally face those memories. The forest around our campsite was denser than I'd initially realized. Ancient pines towered overhead, their trunks so massive that it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle them. The undergrowth was sparse, carpeted with decades of fallen needles that muffled my footsteps as I walked. About a quarter-mile from our camp, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in a grove of particularly old trees was another fire ring, or rather, what remained of one. The stones were blackened and cracked, arranged in a perfect circle around a depression filled with what looked like years' worth of accumulated ash. But it was what lay scattered around the ring that stopped me in my tracks. Bones. Lots of them. Most were clearly animal. Deer, probably based on the size, but there were others that made me deeply uncomfortable. They were picked clean and bleached white by weather and time, arranged in no particular pattern around the ancient fire ring. Some were partially buried in the ash, as if they'd been tossed into the fire and never fully consumed. I found myself backing away from the site, every instinct screaming at me to get Elena and leave this place immediately. But as I turned to go, something caught my eye. Carved into the bark of the largest pine tree about 6 feet off the ground was a message. The fire feeds. The fire grows. The fire never dies. The letters were old, carved deep into the bark and partially healed over with new growth. Below the message, someone had scratched a rough tally, dozens of vertical lines grouped in sets of 5, like a prisoner marking days on a cell wall. I ran back to the campsite, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't fully explain. Elena was sitting at the picnic table, one of her mother's photo albums open in front of her, tears streaming down her face. "We need to leave," I said, breathing hard from my run through the forest. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What? Why?" I started to tell her about what I'd found, but the words died in my throat as I looked past her to the fire ring. It was burning again. This time, the flames were different. They rose higher than before, reaching almost to the lower branches of the surrounding trees. And the wood, God, the wood looked like it was moving, writhing in the flames like living things in agony. The smoke that rose from the fire was thick and black, with an oily quality that made my eyes water and my throat burn. "Elena, get in the RV, now." She must have heard something in my voice that brooked no argument, because she gathered up the photo albums and hurried inside. I followed, locking the door behind us as if that flimsy barrier could keep out whatever was happening outside. "Start the engine," I ordered as I began throwing our belongings into bags. "Marcus, what's going on? You're scaring me." I looked out the window at the fire, which now seemed to be spreading beyond the confines of the stone ring. Small flames danced among the fallen leaves around the fire circle, and the nearby trees were beginning to smoke despite the morning dampness. "There's something wrong with this place," I said, stuffing our clothes into a duffel bag. "We need to get out of here right now." Elena started the RV's engine, but as I disconnected our electrical and water hookups, I realized we had a problem. The forest around us was catching fire, but not in any natural way. The flames seemed to be spreading in deliberate patterns, cutting off our potential escape routes with surgical precision. "The road's blocked," Elena called from the driver's seat. I looked where she was pointing and saw that she was right. A wall of fire had somehow appeared across the narrow dirt road we'd used to reach the campsite. The flames were too high and too intense to drive through, and they were spreading rapidly in both directions. "How is this possible?" Elena whispered. I didn't have an answer. Forest fires don't behave like this. They don't appear instantaneously or burn in perfect geometric patterns. This was something else entirely, something that defied every natural law I understood. The fire from our campsite ring was growing larger by the minute, and I could swear I heard sounds coming from within the flames. Not the normal crackling and popping of burning wood, but something that sounded almost like whispers, or screaming. We have to go on foot, I decided, leave the RV and hike back to the main road. But even as I said it, I knew it was hopeless. The fire was everywhere now, surrounding us in an ever-tightening circle. And yet, impossibly, it wasn't spreading randomly like a normal forest fire. It seemed to be hurting us, keeping us trapped in this one small clearing while it built its strength. Elena grabbed my arm. "Marcus, look at this." She was holding one of her mother's photo albums, open to a page I'd never seen before. The pictures were old, probably from the 1970s based on the clothing and hairstyles, and they showed a group of young people camping in what looked like our exact campsite. "These aren't my mother's pictures," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never seen these people before in my life." I studied the photographs more closely. The campsite was identical. Same fire ring, same arrangement of trees, even the same weathered picnic table. But the people in the pictures were strangers. Young couples and families posing happily around a campfire that looked exactly like the one now burning outside our window. Elena turned the page and we found more photos. Different people this time, but the same campsite. The pictures seemed to span decades. Clothing styles and photo quality changed, but the location remained constant. And in every single photo, there was that same fire burning in the stone ring. "How did these get in my mother's album?" Elena asked. I was about to answer when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. In the corner of one photo, barely visible behind a group of smiling campers, was a figure that didn't belong. It was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing, and its face was completely obscured by shadow. But what terrified me was its posture. It was clearly watching the campers, positioned just outside the circle of firelight like a predator studying its prey. The same figure appeared in the background of several other photos, always watching, always lurking just beyond the reach of the flames. "Elena," I said slowly, "we need to get out of here right now." But it was too late. The fire had completely surrounded us, rising in a perfect circle around our campsite like the walls of some hellish amphitheater. The flames reached 20 feet into the air now, and the heat was becoming unbearable even inside the RV. And that's when I saw them. Shapes moving within the fire. Human figures dancing and writhing in the flames as if they were made of living smoke. Some were clearly the people from the photographs, their faces frozen in eternal expressions of terror and agony. Others were older, much older, dressed in clothing from different eras stretching back generations. "They're all here," Elena whispered, still staring at the photo album. "Everyone who ever camped at this site. They're all trapped in the fire." I watched in horror as more figures emerged from the flames, shambling toward our RV with jerky, unnatural movements. They looked like people, but their edges flickered and danced like heat mirages, and their eyes glowed with the same unnatural colors I'd seen in the fire. "Don't look at them," I told Elena, but she seemed mesmerized by the approaching figures. One of them reached the RV and pressed its burning hands against the window. Where it touched, the glass began to blacken and crack from the intense heat. The thing that had once been human opened its mouth as if to speak, but only smoke poured out. That's when I noticed the most terrifying detail of all. Some of the fire figures were carrying things: cameras, backpacks, personal belongings that had somehow survived their transformation. And one of them, a middle-aged woman with her hair still styled in the fashion of 30 years ago, was clutching a photo album identical to the one Elena held. "It collects them," I realized aloud. "The fire collects everyone who camps here. Their pictures, their memories, their souls. Everything becomes part of it." More figures emerged from the flames, dozens of them now, representing what must have been generations of travelers who'd made the same mistake we had. They pressed against the RV from all sides, their fiery hands leaving scorched handprints on the windows and walls. The interior temperature was rising rapidly, and I could smell the acrid odor of melting plastic and burning electrical components. The RV's systems were beginning to fail, and I knew we had only minutes before the vehicle became our funeral pyre. "The creek," I said suddenly. Water? Fire can't exist in water. I grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the back of the RV, where a small emergency exit provided our only chance of escape. The figures outside seemed to sense our intent, and they pressed closer, their fiery forms leaving smoking impressions wherever they touched. I kicked open the emergency exit and immediately felt the searing heat of the flames. The fire figures reached for us with burning fingers, but I pulled Elena through the opening and into the night. The run to the creek felt like diving through the gates of hell. Fire surrounded us on all sides, and the temperature was so intense that my clothes began to smolder. Elena cried out as one of the figures brushed against her arm, leaving a handprint-shaped burn on her skin. But we reached the water, plunging into the cold creek just as our clothing burst into flames. The fire figures followed us to the water's edge but could go no further, standing like sentinels along the bank while we huddled in the shallow stream. For a moment, I thought we were safe. The water was cold and clear, and the flames couldn't reach us here. But then I noticed that the creek itself was beginning to warm, steam rising from the surface as some impossible heat source worked its way upstream. "It's heating the water," Elena gasped. "It's going to boil us alive." The fire figures along the bank began to glow brighter, and I realized they were somehow channeling their heat into the stream. The water temperature was rising rapidly, and I could feel my skin beginning to blister where I was submerged. That's when I remembered the photo album. "Elena, where's the album?" She looked down at her hands and gasped. Somehow, impossibly, she was still clutching the waterlogged book. The photos inside were ruined by the creek water, but the album itself remained intact. "Throw it back," I said. "Give it what it wants." "What?" "The fire feeds on memories, on the people who come here. Your mother's album must have been connected to this place somehow. Maybe if we give it back, it will let us go." Elena hesitated for a moment, then hurled the album toward the fire. It landed at the feet of the burning figures, who immediately converged on it like moths to a flame. As they touched the waterlogged book, it burst into brilliant white light. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The fire figures began to scream, a sound like wind through broken glass, and one by one they collapsed back into the flames from which they'd emerged. The wall of fire around the campsite began to recede, pulling back toward the original stone ring. Within minutes, the supernatural inferno had reduced itself to a normal-looking campfire, crackling peacefully in the stone circle as if nothing had happened. The forest around us showed no signs of burning, despite the fact that moments earlier it had been an inferno. We crawled out of the creek, our clothes torn and our skin blistered from the heat and scalding water. The RV was damaged but intact, and most importantly, the road was clear. I don't remember much about our escape from that place. We threw our remaining belongings into the RV and drove through the night, not stopping until we reached the interstate. Elena slept fitfully in the passenger seat, whimpering in her dreams and occasionally calling out for her mother. It wasn't until we were safely back in Little Rock that we tried to make sense of what had happened. I researched the area where we'd camped and found references to similar incidents going back more than a century. Travelers would report strange fires that couldn't be extinguished, mysterious disappearances, and sightings of burning figures in the forest. The local authorities always dismissed these reports as folklore or hallucinations. But I found enough documented cases to confirm that we weren't the first to encounter whatever lurked in those mountains. Most troubling were the missing person reports. Dozens of people over the years who'd gone camping in the Ouachitas and simply vanished, leaving behind only cold campsites and the lingering smell of smoke. Elena never fully recovered from our experience. The burns on her arm healed, but she was left with permanent scarring in the exact shape of a human handprint. She became obsessed with fire safety, checking and rechecking every appliance in our house multiple times each night. But worse than the paranoia was the way she would sometimes stare into candle flames or the fireplace with a look of terrible longing, as if some part of her was still trapped in that burning circle. 3 months after our return, she started sleepwalking. I would wake to find her standing in our backyard, staring up at the stars with tears streaming down her face. When I asked her about it in the morning, she would claim no memory of leaving the house. The sleepwalking episodes became more frequent and more disturbing. Elena would build small fires in our backyard using matches and newspaper, then stand over them for hours without seeming to notice the cold. I tried hiding all the matches and lighters in the house, but she always found a way to create flames. The breaking point came 6 months after our trip. I woke one night to find Elena's side of the bed empty and the smell of smoke drifting through the house. I found her in the backyard, standing beside a fire that was burning far too bright for the small amount of newspaper and kindling she could have gathered. But it wasn't the fire that terrified me. It was Elena herself. She was smiling, that same empty smile I'd seen on the faces of the fire figures in the forest. And when she turned to look at me, her eyes reflected the flames like mirrors. "It's calling me home, Marcus," she said in a voice that was hers but somehow different, hollow and echoing. "The fire is calling me home." That's when I knew we hadn't escaped at all. Whatever had taken residence in that campsite had followed us back, hiding dormant in Elena's scarred flesh until it was strong enough to begin pulling her back to where it belonged. I called her name, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stepped into the fire. I lunged forward to pull her out, but the flames weren't behaving like normal fire. They wrapped around Elena like loving arms, lifting her off the ground and cradling her against their burning embrace. She didn't scream, didn't struggle. She simply dissolved into the light and heat, becoming one with the impossible flames. The fire burned for exactly 13 minutes, then vanished as if it had never existed. No trace of Elena remained, except for the handprint-shaped scar, which I found burned into the grass where she'd been standing. That was 3 years ago. I've tried to move on, tried to convince myself it was all some kind of elaborate shared hallucination brought on by grief and stress. But every night, I can smell that sweet, acrid smoke seeping through my bedroom walls. And sometimes, when I'm almost asleep, I can hear Elena's voice calling to me from very far away, promising that the fire is warm and welcoming, that all I have to do is step into the flames and we can be together again. I know she's still there, somewhere in that burning circle in the Ouachita Mountains, along with all the others who made the mistake of camping at that cursed site. They're all feeding the fire now, helping it grow stronger, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting travelers to stumble into their trap. The worst part is that part of me wants to go back. Part of me misses Elena so desperately that the idea of joining her in those eternal flames doesn't seem like such a terrible fate. On the coldest nights, when the loneliness becomes unbearable, I find myself looking up directions to that campsite, planning a route back to the place where everything went wrong. But I know better now. I know that some fires aren't meant to be extinguished and some prices are too high to pay. The fire in the Ouachitas has been burning for generations, feeding on the memories and souls of travelers who thought they were just looking for a peaceful night in the wilderness. And it's still burning now, waiting patiently for the next victims to find their way to that stone circle in the forest, waiting to add their pictures to its collection, their voices to its chorus of the damned. Sometimes I wonder if writing this story is just another way for the fire to spread its influence, like spores carried on the wind to infect new ground. Maybe by telling you about that place, I'm helping it reach beyond the boundaries of the forest, extending its hungry grasp into the wider world. But I have to believe that knowledge is power, that warning people about the dangers hidden in those mountains might save lives. If you ever find yourself camping in the Arkansas wilderness, if you ever see a fire that burns too bright or hear whispers in the flames, remember my story. Remember Elena and all the others who fed the fire that never dies. And whatever you do, make sure your campfire is completely extinguished before you sleep. Because in some places, in some forgotten corners of the world, the fire has a will of its own, and it's always hungry. Story 4. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Rebecca Hill. I had just turned 28 when we arrived at Kisatchie Forest in Louisiana, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The warning was carved into a massive cypress tree at the entrance to the backcountry campground. The letters deep and weathered. Don't listen to her. Below it, someone had scratched in fresher cuts. She sounds like someone you know. My boyfriend Marcus rolled his eyes as he guided our rented RV past the tree. Probably some local legend to keep tourists away from the good fishing spots, he said, adjusting his baseball cap. At 30, Marcus had this way of dismissing anything that couldn't be explained with logic or fixed with his hands. It's what made him a good contractor back in Houston, but it also made him stubborn. I think it's creepy, said Chloe from the passenger seat, taking a photo of the carved warning with her phone. My younger sister was 25 and still chasing Instagram moments, but she had good instincts about people. What if it's not about a legend? What if it's about a real person? Then we'll just avoid weird forest ladies. Marcus laughed, reaching over to squeeze my knee. Right, babe? I nodded, but something about that tree bothered me. The bark around the warning had grown oddly, creating raised ridges that made the letters look like they were bleeding. And the fresher scratches below, they didn't look fresh at all. They looked hungry. We'd planned this RV trip for months. Marcus needed a break from the construction stress. Chloe was between jobs again, and I'd just finished a brutal audit season at the firm. 3 days in the Louisiana wilderness seemed perfect. Fishing, hiking, and enough cell service for Chloe to maintain her social media presence. The Kisatchie National Forest was supposed to be peaceful, remote, but not dangerous. The campground stretched along the banks of a dark, tea-colored bayou. Massive cypress trees draped with Spanish moss created a cathedral ceiling above us, filtering the late afternoon sun into dancing shadows. Our site was isolated, tucked between 2 towering trees about 50 yards from the water. Perfect for privacy, terrible for everything else that happened. This place is gorgeous, Chloe said, already posing against the RV for photos. Look at this lighting. It's so atmospheric. I helped Marcus level the RV while she documented every angle. The forest was beautiful, I had to admit. Ancient and wild, with that primordial feeling you get in places humans haven't fully tamed. Spanish moss hung like curtains, swaying in the humid breeze. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the low bellow of an alligator. Gators keep the raccoons away, Marcus said, following my gaze toward the water. Natural pest control. We spent the first evening setting up camp and cooking dinner on the RV's outdoor grill. Marcus had brought his fishing gear, Chloe had enough camera equipment for a professional shoot, and I'd packed enough books to last a month. Everything felt normal, perfect, even. That night we sat around our portable fire pit, sharing stories and watching fireflies dance between the trees. The darkness here was absolute. No city lights, just the occasional sweep of a flashlight from a distant campsite. The sounds of the bayou created a symphony. Frogs croaking, water lapping against cypress knees, the rustle of Spanish moss in the breeze. This is exactly what I needed, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with a beer. No deadlines, no clients, no— Shh, Chloe interrupted, holding up her hand. Do you hear that? We listened. Over the ambient forest sounds there was something else. A voice, distant and unclear, coming from the direction of the bayou. Help. Please help. The voice was female, young and desperate. It seemed to be coming from the water itself. Marcus was on his feet immediately. Someone's in trouble. He grabbed his flashlight and started toward the bayou. I followed, my heart racing. The voice came again, clearer now. Help me. I'm lost. Please. Where are you? Marcus called out, sweeping his flashlight across the water. The beam caught the eyes of an alligator about 20 feet from shore, but nothing else. Here, over here. The voice seemed to move, first from our left, then our right. I can't find my way. Chloe had joined us now, her phone's flashlight adding to our search. I don't see anyone, she whispered. We spent 20 minutes looking, calling out, searching the shoreline. The voice continued, always just out of reach, always desperate. But we never saw anyone. Eventually, Marcus convinced us to return to camp. Probably someone on the other side of the bayou, he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Sound carries weird over water. Should we call the rangers? I asked. With what? We don't have exact coordinates, and we never actually saw anyone. Marcus shook his head. If we hear it again, we'll call. But the voice had stopped. The forest returned to its normal symphony. as if nothing had happened. That night, I lay awake in the RV's queen bed, listening to Marcus snore beside me. Chloe had taken the convertible dinette, and I could hear her scrolling through her phone. The voice by the water kept replaying in my mind. Something about it bothered me, beyond the obvious concern for someone in distress. It had sounded familiar. I woke to the smell of coffee and Marcus humming outside. Sunlight streamed through the RV's windows, making the previous night feel like a dream. Chloe was already up, editing photos on her laptop while eating cereal. "Sleep okay?" she asked without looking up. "Fine," I lied. "You?" That voice kept me up for a while. "Did you notice anything weird about it?" I paused, halfway through pulling on my hiking boots. "Like what?" It sounded like, I don't know, like someone I knew. She shrugged, still focused on her screen. "Probably just my imagination." Marcus poked his head through the door. "Coffee's ready. Who wants to explore today?" We decided to hike the Backbone Trail, a moderate loop that would take us deeper into the forest. Marcus wanted to find some fishing spots. Chloe wanted more photo opportunities, and I just wanted to shake the unease from the night before. The trail was well marked initially, winding through pine forests and around small lakes. We saw plenty of wildlife: deer, squirrels, various birds, and Chloe got her content. Marcus identified several promising fishing spots for later. Everything was normal. About 2 miles in, we found another tree with carving. This one was fresher, the cuts still weeping sap. The message was simple: "She knows your voice." "Okay, that's definitely creepy," Chloe said, taking photos from multiple angles. Marcus examined the carving closely. "This is recent, maybe a day or two old." "Should we turn back?" I asked. "Come on, Becca, it's just someone trying to spook tourists." But Marcus's voice lacked its usual confidence. "We'll keep going. Stay alert." The trail continued for another mile before we realized we were lost. "This doesn't match the map," Marcus said, studying the trail guide. "We should have hit the lake by now." The forest around us looked different, too. The trees were larger, older, with Spanish moss hanging so thick it blocked most of the sunlight. The air felt heavier, more humid, and there was an odd smell, sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. "The trail's still marked," Chloe pointed out. "See? The blazes are right there." She was right. White blazes painted on trees marked our path clearly. But according to the map, we shouldn't be here. "Let's follow it back," I suggested. "Retrace our steps." We turned around, but after 15 minutes of walking, we hadn't reached any landmarks we remembered. The forest seemed to shift around us, paths appearing and disappearing between the massive trees. "This is impossible," Marcus muttered, checking his GPS. "The signal's dead." That's when we heard it again. The voice. "Help. Please help me." This time it came from directly ahead of us on the trail. Clear, desperate, and unmistakably female. "Hello," Marcus called out. "Where are you? I'm lost. I've been walking for hours." The voice was closer now, maybe 50 feet ahead, but we couldn't see anyone through the Spanish moss curtains. We followed the voice, pushing through the hanging moss. The sweet, rotten smell grew stronger, and I noticed the trees here were different. Larger, ancient. Their trunks were scarred with old carvings, symbols I didn't recognize. "Here. I'm here." The voice led us into a small clearing dominated by a massive cypress tree. Its trunk was so wide that 6 people holding hands couldn't have circled it. The Spanish moss hanging from its branches created a natural amphitheater, filtering the sunlight into an eerie green glow. "I don't see anyone," Chloe whispered. "Help me. Please." The voice was coming from the tree itself. Marcus aimed his flashlight at the trunk and we all gasped. The entire surface was covered in carvings. Not random graffiti, but deliberate messages, warnings, pleas. Some looked decades old. Others seemed fresh. "Don't trust the voice." "She took my brother." "Sarah, come home." "The tree hungers." "Don't listen to her." And there, carved at eye level in letters that seemed to pulse with their own light, "Rebecca Hill, 2025. My name. This year." "What the hell?" Marcus stepped back, pulling me with him. "How is that possible?" Chloe whispered, her camera clicking rapidly. The voice came again, but this time it was different. Clearer, more familiar. "Becca, Becca, where are you?" It was my mother's voice. My mother, who had died 3 years ago from cancer. My mother, who used to call me Becca in exactly that tone when I was a child and she couldn't find me in the house. "That's not possible," I breathed. "Becca, honey, I need you to come here. I need to tell you something important." Marcus grabbed my arm as I stepped toward the tree. "Don't. Whatever that is, it's not your mother." But it sounded exactly like her. The inflection, the warmth, even the slight rasp she'd developed from years of smoking. How could anything fake that so perfectly? "Becca, please, I don't have much time." "Mom?" The word escaped before I could stop it. "Yes, honey, I'm here. I've been waiting for you." Tears were streaming down my face. I knew it couldn't be real, but the voice was so perfect, so her, that my heart overruled my brain. "Becca, no." Chloe grabbed my other arm. "Remember the carvings. Remember the warnings." "I miss you so much," I called out to the tree. "I miss you too, baby. But I need you to come closer. I need to see you." I took another step forward, but Marcus and Chloe held me back. "Look at the tree," Marcus said urgently. "Really look at it." I focused on the massive trunk through my tears. The bark seemed to be moving, shifting, breathing. And there, about 8 feet up, was an opening. Not a hollow, an opening. Like a mouth. "She's in there," I whispered. "She's trapped in there." Becca, that's not your mother," Chloe said firmly. "Mom never called you baby. She always said honey or sweetie, remember?" She was right. Mom had never called me baby, but the voice was so perfect otherwise. "Come to me, Rebecca." The voice changed slightly, losing some of its warmth. "Come to me now." That's when I noticed the smell wasn't flowers at all. It was decay. Sweet, cloying decay, like rotting meat left in the sun. "We need to leave," Marcus said. "Now." We backed away from the tree, but the forest around us had changed again. The paths we'd followed into the clearing were gone. Spanish moss hung like walls in every direction, and the trees seemed closer, more oppressive. "Rebecca Hill!" The voice from the tree was different now. Still female, but wrong somehow. Like someone doing a bad impression. "You cannot leave. You belong here now." "Run," Marcus said. We crashed through the Spanish moss, branches tearing at our clothes, moss wrapping around our arms like grasping fingers. Behind us, the voice laughed, a sound that started human but ended as something else entirely. We ran for what felt like hours, the forest seeming to shift around us with each step. Just when I thought we were completely lost, we burst through a wall of moss and found ourselves back on the marked trail, gasping and covered in scratches. "How is that possible?" Chloe panted. Marcus checked his GPS. "Signal's back. We're exactly where we started the hike." According to his watch, only 20 minutes had passed since we'd left the RV. "That's impossible," I said. "We were lost for hours." "Were we?" Marcus looked at our phones. All of them showed the same time, the same date. 20 minutes. We hiked back to camp in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The logical part of my brain tried to rationalize what had happened. Heat, exhaustion, group hallucination, some kind of gas leak from decomposing vegetation. But I couldn't explain away my name carved in that tree, or how perfectly the voice had mimicked my mother. That evening, we barely spoke. Marcus fished from the shore while Chloe edited photos and I tried to read. But every sound from the forest made us jump, and as darkness fell, we all gravitated closer to the RV. "Maybe we should leave early," Chloe suggested over dinner. "Because of some weird echo in the woods?" Marcus forced a laugh. "Come on, we've got 2 more days." "It wasn't an echo," I said quietly. "That was my mother's voice. Your mother is dead, Becca." His words were gentle but firm. "Whatever we heard, it wasn't her." "Then how do you explain my name on that tree?" Marcus didn't have an answer for that. That night I lay awake again, listening to the forest sounds. Around midnight, I heard it again. My mother's voice, distant but clear, calling my name from the direction of the bayou. Becca, Becca, honey. I sat up in bed, careful not to wake Marcus. Through the RV's window, I could see the bayou glimmering in the moonlight. Spanish moss swayed gently in the breeze, creating shifting shadows that looked almost human. Becca, I need to tell you something. About your father. My father. The man who'd walked out when I was 7 and never came back. Mom had never told me why, just that some people weren't meant to be parents. But the voice was promising answers. I slipped out of bed and crept to the window. The bayou was perfectly still, reflecting the moon like black glass. And there, standing waist-deep in the water about 30 feet from shore, was a figure. It looked like my mother. Same height, same build, same graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing the yellow sundress I'd buried her in, and she was looking directly at me. Becca, she said, and I could hear her perfectly through the glass. Come talk to me. I have so much to tell you. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it was whatever had been in that tree, using my mother's appearance to lure me out. But the resemblance was perfect, and the promise of answers about my father was almost irresistible. You need to know the truth, the figure continued, about why he left, about what he did. My hand was on the RV door handle before I realized I'd moved. Becca, no. Chloe's voice behind me made me jump. She was sitting up in her bed, watching me. That's not Mom. It looks exactly like her. Look closer. I pressed my face to the window. The figure in the water was still there, still beckoning. But as I stared, I began to notice the details. The yellow dress was wrong. Too bright, too new. Mom's hair had been shorter when she died. And her face wasn't quite right. The features were close but not perfect, like a sculpture made by someone working from a photograph instead of life. The real Mom would never call you out there alone, Chloe whispered. She'd come to you. She was right. Mom had always been protective, especially after Dad left. She would never ask me to wade into a bayou in the middle of the night. The figure in the water seemed to sense my hesitation. Becca, please. I don't have much time. She's coming back. Who's coming back? I called out. The other one, the one who sounds like me. She's not me, Becca. I'm your real mother. Now there were 2 of them claiming to be my mother, the tree voice and the water figure. Both perfect imitations, both promising answers I desperately wanted. Don't listen to her, Chloe said firmly. Don't listen to either of them. The figure in the water began to change. Her face twisted with anger, the features becoming less human, more predatory. You little bitch, she snarled in a voice that was definitely not my mother's. You're ruining everything. The thing that had been pretending to be my mother sank beneath the surface of the bayou with barely a ripple. Jesus, I breathed, stepping back from the window. Are you okay? Marcus was awake now, rubbing his eyes. Something was pretending to be Mom, I said. In the water. It looked exactly like her. Marcus joined us at the window, but the bayou was empty now. Just moonlight on dark water and the gentle sway of Spanish moss. I think we should leave, Chloe said. First thing in the morning. Agreed, Marcus said without his usual argument. But morning brought new problems. I woke to the sound of Marcus swearing outside. When I emerged from the RV, I found him standing next to our truck staring at the tires. All 4 were flat, not punctured but completely deflated, as if the air had simply been let out overnight. Vandalism, Chloe suggested. No, Marcus said grimly. Look at the valve stems. The rubber valve stems had been chewed off, bitten clean through by something with very sharp teeth. What has teeth like that? I asked. Marcus examined the marks closely. Nothing I've ever seen. These are precise, surgical, almost human, but... He didn't finish the thought, but I could see it in his eyes. Human teeth didn't make cuts this clean. The spare's flat, too, he reported after checking, and the air compressor won't start. We were stranded. Cell service? Chloe checked her phone. Still nothing. There's a ranger station about 5 miles east, Marcus said, consulting the park map. I can hike there, get help. We stick together, I said immediately. Remember what happened yesterday. That was just what? I interrupted. We got lost for hours in a 20-minute time span. We found my name carved in a tree. Something's been impersonating my dead mother. And now our tires are chewed off. Does any of that sound normal to you? Marcus sighed. No, it doesn't. So we stick together. We packed light, water, snacks, first aid kit, and set out for the ranger station. The morning was humid and overcast, with low clouds hanging between the trees like fog. The forest felt different in daylight, less obviously threatening, but more subtly wrong. The sounds were muted, the colors slightly off, as if we were walking through a faded photograph of a real place. The trail to the ranger station was well marked, but after yesterday's experience we didn't trust the blazes completely. Marcos kept checking his GPS, confirming our position every few hundred yards. About 2 miles in, we found the third carving. This tree was smaller than the others, a young cypress maybe 50 years old. The message was carved deep into the trunk, the letters filled with some kind of dark resin that made them stand out like fresh wounds. Chloe Jenkins, 2025. My sister's name. That wasn't there yesterday, Marcus said. How do you know? Chloe's voice was small, frightened. Because I photographed every carving we found. Look. He showed us his phone. The photos from yesterday showed the same tree, but the trunk was blank. Someone carved this overnight, I said. Or something, Chloe whispered. We stared at the carving for a long moment. The dark resin filling the letters seemed to move slightly, like thick blood. We need to keep moving, Marcus said. But as we turned to continue down the trail, we heard a familiar voice calling from deeper in the woods. Chloe, Chloe, honey, where are you? This time it was our mother's voice calling for Chloe. My sister went rigid. That's not possible. Chloe, sweetie, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you about Rebecca. About me? I said. Don't listen, Marcus warned. Remember the tree. But the voice continued, perfect in every detail. Chloe, honey, your sister's in danger. She doesn't know what she really is. What your father made her. What's that supposed to mean? Chloe asked, but she was asking us, not the voice. It's trying to split us up, I said. That's what predators do. Isolate their prey. Chloe, please. Rebecca isn't who you think she is. She isn't even human. The words hit like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. That's not true, I said. Look at her, Chloe. Really, look at her. When did you last see her bleed? When did you last see her eat? When did you last see her sleep? Chloe was staring at me now, and I could see doubt creeping into her eyes. I eat, I said desperately. I sleep. You've seen me. Have I? Chloe's voice was uncertain. I mean, I've seen you with food, but have I actually seen you eat it? And last night you were awake when that thing came to the window. How long had you been awake? I don't know. She's been watching you, Chloe. Studying you. Learning how to replace you. Stop it, Marcus said firmly. This is exactly what it wants. It wants us to turn on each other. But the voice continued, relentless. Ask her about the mirror, Chloe. Ask her why she never looks in mirrors. I felt cold dread spreading through my chest. I tried to remember the last time I'd looked in a mirror. Really looked, and couldn't. Becca? Chloe's voice was small. Look at me. I met her eyes and saw my own fear reflected there. Now look at the water, she said, pointing to a small puddle beside the trail. I looked down at the puddle and saw Marcus's reflection, Chloe's reflection, and the trees above us. But where my reflection should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty space in the water, as if I wasn't there at all. What the hell? Marcus breathed. I knelt beside the puddle, waving my hand over the surface. The water rippled, but showed no reflection of my movements. This isn't possible, I said. Unless you're not really Rebecca, Chloe whispered. The voice from the woods laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Finally, the truth comes out. I stood up, backing away from my sister and boyfriend. I'm me. I'm Rebecca Hill. I remember everything. My childhood, Mom's death, meeting Marcus. Memories can be implanted, the voice said sweetly, especially in something that was never really alive to begin with. "Stop it!" I screamed at the trees. "I'm human. I'm real." But even as I said it, I was remembering things. How I never seemed to get hungry at normal times. How I could stay awake for days without feeling tired. How I always seemed to know things I shouldn't know, like where the trail went even when we were lost. "She replaced the real Rebecca 3 years ago," the voice continued. "Right after your mother's funeral. That's when she had access to all of Rebecca's memories, all her mannerisms. She's been perfecting the performance ever since." "That's not true," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. "The real Rebecca is in the tree," the voice said. "She's been calling for help, but this thing has been blocking her voice, stealing her words." I thought about the carving we'd found. Don't listen to her. Not a warning about the voice in the forest. A warning about me. "I'm real," I whispered, but I was no longer sure. Marcus and Chloe were backing away from me now, their faces filled with horror and uncertainty. "How do we know which voice to believe?" Marcus asked. "Test her," the voice suggested. "Cut her. See if she bleeds." Marcus pulled out his pocket knife, and I felt a primal terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not fear of pain, but fear of what we might discover. "Please," I begged. "Please don't." "If you're really Rebecca, you'll bleed," Chloe said. "If you're really my sister, you'll prove it." I held out my hand, trembling. Marcus approached slowly, the knife gleaming in the filtered sunlight. He pressed the tip to my palm and drew it across. Nothing happened. No cut. No blood. The knife passed through my palm like I wasn't there. "Oh God," Chloe breathed. "What are you?" I stared at my unmarked hand in horror. The knife had gone right through me as if I were made of air. "I don't know," I whispered. The laughter from the woods grew louder, more triumphant. "She doesn't even know what she is. Just a shadow, an echo, wearing Rebecca's face." "Where is she?" Chloe demanded, her voice breaking. "Where's my real sister?" "Follow me," the voice said. "I'll show you." And despite everything, despite all the warnings and all our fear, we followed. The voice led us off the trail, deeper into the ancient forest. The trees grew larger and more twisted, their branches forming a canopy so thick that barely any light filtered through. The air grew heavier, more humid, filled with that sweet, sick smell of decay. We walked for what felt like hours, though Marcus's GPS showed only minutes passing. Time moved differently here, following rules that had nothing to do with the outside world. Finally, we reached the clearing with the massive cypress tree, the one covered in carvings, the one with the mouth-like opening 8 feet up its trunk. "She's in there," the voice said, coming from all around us now. "Your real sister. She's been waiting for you." Chloe approached the tree cautiously. "Rebecca, are you in there?" A weak voice answered from inside the trunk. Chloe, is that you? Please, help me. I've been trapped for so long." It was my voice. Exactly my voice, but thinner, weaker, desperate. "How long have you been in there?" Chloe called. "Since Mom's funeral. It grabbed me when I was walking alone. Pulled me into the tree. It's been stealing my voice, my memories, my life. I listened to this other version of myself and felt something breaking inside my chest. Not my heart, I wasn't sure I had one, but something essential to what I thought I was." "How do we get you out?" Marcus asked. "You have to send her back," the voice from the tree said. "The false one. She has to take my place." All eyes turned to me. I backed away, shaking my head. "No, I'm not going in there." "You're not real," Chloe said, tears streaming down her face. "You're just a copy, a shadow." "I feel real," I said desperately. "I have thoughts, feelings, memories." "Stolen memories," Marcus said. "Stolen from the real Rebecca." The voice from the tree grew more urgent. "Please, hurry. I'm so weak. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." "I remember loving you," I said to Chloe. "I remember being sisters, sharing secrets, fighting over clothes. I remember holding your hair when you were sick. I remember." "Those aren't your memories," Chloe said firmly. "They're hers. But they feel like mine. Feelings can be fake too." I looked at Marcus, hoping for some support, some recognition of what we'd shared. But his eyes were cold, distant. "You're not the woman I fell in love with," he said. "She's in that tree." The words shattered something inside me. I felt myself becoming less solid, less real, as if their belief in my falseness was actually unmaking me. "Please," I whispered, "please don't do this." "It's not about what we want," Chloe said. "It's about what's right. Rebecca belongs with us. You belong, wherever you came from." The opening in the tree trunk seemed to pulse like a mouth breathing. I could feel it pulling at me, calling to something deep in whatever I was. "I won't go," I said. "Then we'll make you," Marcus said, raising his knife. But as he stepped toward me, the weak voice from the tree spoke again. "Wait. Don't hurt her. She didn't choose this. She's as much a victim as I am." Marcus paused. "What do you mean?" "The tree," the voice explained. "It feeds on human souls, but it needs vessels to hunt for it. It creates copies, shadows that look human but aren't. They don't know what they are until someone tells them." I felt a sick understanding wash over me. "I'm bait." "You're how it hunts," the voice confirmed. "It sends you out into the world, lets you live, love, form connections. Then it calls you back, and the people who care about you follow. Like we did," Chloe breathed. "The tree feeds on the anguish of loss," the voice continued. "The pain of choosing between the fake and the real. The horror of discovery. It's been feeding on that pain for centuries." I looked around the clearing and really saw it for the first time. The ground was covered in small bones, bleached white by time. Human bones. The remains of people who had followed their lost loved ones into this place. "How many?" I asked. "Hundreds," the voice from the tree said sadly. "Maybe thousands. Everyone who ever came looking for someone who disappeared in these woods." "And now you want us to choose?" Marcus asked. "Between the two of you?" "There is no choice," the voice said. "I'm already dead. I've been dead for 3 years. The tree keeps my voice, my memories, to make the copies more convincing. But my soul is gone." "Then what's been talking to us?" "An echo. A recording. The tree playing back what it recorded of me before I died." I felt the last of my self-certainty crumble. If the voice in the tree was just an echo, then what was I? What had I been for the past 3 years? "She's not real either," the echo continued. "But she thinks she is. She has feelings, memories, experiences. In every way that matters, she's human. More human than the thing that created her." "So what do we do?" Chloe asked. "You run," the echo said. "You run, and you don't look back, and you let her run with you." "But," Marcus started. "There is no but," the echo interrupted. "I'm dead. I've been dead for years. You can't save me, but you can save her, and yourselves." The tree began to shake, its branches thrashing despite the still air. The sweet, sick smell grew stronger, more choking. "It knows," the echo said urgently. "It knows I've told you the truth. It's angry. You need to go now." The opening in the trunk began to grow larger, and something dark and wet started to emerge. Not human, but wearing pieces of humanity like ill-fitting clothes. "Run!" the echo screamed. We ran. Behind us, the thing that was emerging from the tree let out a sound that was part roar, part scream, and part something else entirely. The forest shook with its rage, branches reaching down to snare us, roots rising up to trip us. But we kept running, crashing through Spanish moss and undergrowth, following Marcus's GPS back toward the trail. The thing pursued us, its footsteps shaking the ground, its voice echoing through the trees in a dozen different languages. We reached the trail and kept running, not stopping until we saw the RV in the distance. Our tires were still flat, but Marcus had an idea. "The ranger station," he panted. "If we can reach it on foot." Story 5. I never believed in the stories they told about Mogal and Rim, until what happened to me out there. My name is Derek Spencer, I'm 34 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. The whole thing started as a simple RV trip, my first real vacation in 3 years. I'd bought the Winnebago Vista off Craigslist from a nervous-looking guy in Phoenix who kept checking his watch and wouldn't meet my eyes. 26 feet of freedom, he called it. Should have asked him what he was so eager to be free from. I picked the Mogollon Rim because it promised solitude. 200 miles of rugged plateau cutting across central Arizona, thick with ponderosa pines and hidden meadows. The perfect place to decompress from my job managing a warehouse in Tucson. I'd been having anxiety attacks at work, heart racing, vision blurring, the whole 9 yards. My doctor said I needed to get away from screens and stress, find some peace in nature. The irony still burns. I drove up from the desert on Highway 260, watching the landscape transform from cactus and scrub to towering evergreens. The elevation climbed from 2,400 feet to over 7,000, and with it came a blessed coolness that felt like stepping into air conditioning. My GPS started acting strange around Payson, the screen flickering between routes that made no sense. I figured it was the altitude messing with the satellite signal. The campground I'd reserved was called Pine Shadow RV Park, tucked deep in the National Forest about 40 minutes past Show Low. According to their website, it offered primitive beauty with modern conveniences, which turned out to be marketing speak for pit toilets and a hand pump for water. But it was isolated, which was exactly what I wanted. The sun was setting behind the pines when I pulled into Site 47, the last spot on a narrow dirt road that seemed to wind deeper into the forest than necessary. The other sites were empty, not surprising for a Thursday in late September. The campground host's trailer sat dark and silent near the entrance, a hand-painted sign reading, "Back Monday," taped to the door. I was completely alone in 50,000 acres of wilderness. Setting up the RV took longer than expected. The leveling jacks wouldn't extend properly on the uneven ground, and I had to use wooden blocks to stabilize the rear end. By the time I got the water and electrical hookups connected, full darkness had settled over the forest like a heavy blanket. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no neighbors, no hum of civilization, just the occasional whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant hoot of an owl. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt expectant, like the forest was holding its breath. I heated up a can of chili on the RV's stovetop and ate while reading a paperback thriller by LED lantern light. The propane heater kept the interior comfortable, but every few minutes I'd hear something outside, a branch creaking, footsteps in the underbrush, the soft thud of pine cones dropping to earth. Normal forest sounds, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Around midnight, I heard voices. At first, I thought it might be other campers arriving late. The voices were muffled, indistinct, somewhere between a whisper and normal conversation. I couldn't make out words, but the cadence was definitely human, rising and falling like people having a discussion. I turned off the lantern and peered through the RV's small windows. The forest was a wall of black, punctuated by the silver gleam of moonlight on pine bark. I couldn't see anyone, but the voices continued, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Then I heard my own voice among them. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. It was unmistakably me, the same slight rasp I'd developed from years of shouting over warehouse machinery, the same Arizona accent I'd never quite lost despite living in the city. But the words were foreign, jumbled, like someone playing a recording of me speaking backwards. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, my heart hammering against my ribs. The beam swept across empty campsite after empty campsite, revealing nothing but picnic tables and fire rings. The voices had stopped the moment the RV door opened. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. "Anyone there?" My voice echoed strangely among the trees, seeming to bounce back from multiple directions with slight delays, like a badly tuned radio. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, weighted with unseen attention. I went back inside and locked the door, though I couldn't say what I thought I was locking out. Sleep came eventually, but it was restless and full of dreams where I walked through endless forests calling my own name. Friday morning brought crisp air and golden sunlight filtering through the pines. In daylight, the previous night's strangeness seemed like paranoid imagination. I made coffee and eggs on the RV's stove, planning a day hike to nearby Oak Creek. The forest was beautiful, cathedral quiet, and smelling of pine resin and wild mint. I packed a day bag with water, trail mix, and my camera, then set off on what the campground map labeled as Trail 3, a moderate 5-mile loop through old-growth forest. The path was well-maintained but lightly used, marked with blue blazes painted on tree trunks every 100 yards or so. 2 miles in, I encountered my first mirror. It was hanging from a pine branch about 8 feet off the ground, tilted at an angle that caught the morning sun and threw dazzling reflections across the trail. A small, round mirror, maybe 6 inches across, with a cheap wooden frame like something from a gas station bathroom, completely out of place in the wilderness. I studied it for several minutes, trying to make sense of its presence. Hunters sometimes used mirrors to signal each other, but hunting season wouldn't start for another month. Maybe it was some kind of trail marker, though it didn't appear on any of my maps. When I looked into the mirror, my reflection looked normal. Tired face, 3 days of stubble, sweat-stained baseball cap. But something about the image felt wrong, like a photograph that's slightly out of focus. I couldn't quite put my finger on what bothered me about it. I took a photo and continued hiking. The trail wound through groves of aspen and oak, their leaves just beginning to turn autumn colors. I found 2 more mirrors over the next hour, one tied to a low branch at eye level, another wedged between the split trunk of a lightning-struck pine. Both were similar to the first, cheap, round, perfectly clean despite being exposed to the elements. Each time I looked into them, my reflection seemed slightly off. In the second mirror, my eyes appeared darker than they should have been. In the third, my smile looked forced, though I wasn't smiling at all. I started photographing each mirror I found, thinking I might ask about them at the ranger station in Show Low. By noon, I'd documented 7 mirrors along the trail, forming a rough semicircle around what appeared to be the deepest part of the forest. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach clench with anxiety. In the photos on my camera's LCD screen, the mirrors reflected not just my image, but other figures standing behind me. Shadowy forms that definitely hadn't been there when I took the pictures. In one photo, a tall figure in dark clothing stood just over my left shoulder. In another, a child-sized shape crouched at the base of a nearby tree. I spun around, scanning the forest behind me. Empty. Nothing but pines and dappled sunlight. I deleted the photos and took new ones, but the same figures appeared in each shot. Always in slightly different positions, always just behind me or at the edges of the frame. The mirrors seemed to be showing something my eyes couldn't see. My hands were shaking as I packed the camera away. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be an explanation. Camera malfunction, digital artifacts, pareidolia making me see faces in shadows. But my gut knew something was fundamentally wrong with this place. I turned around and started hiking back toward the RV, following the blue blazes in reverse. But instead of leading me back to the campground, the trail seemed to curve deeper into the forest. I walked for an hour without recognizing any landmarks from my outbound journey. The mirrors were still there, but now they were on the opposite side of the trail. I stopped at one I was certain I'd passed earlier, the round mirror wedged between the split pine trunk. I could have sworn it had been on my right when I hiked out, but now it was clearly on my left. When I looked into it, my reflection was wearing different clothes. Instead of my blue hiking shirt and khaki pants, the image showed me in a red flannel and jeans I'd never owned. The reflection smiled at me with my own face, but I wasn't smiling. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail entirely. I needed to find the campground, needed to get back to the RV and drive away from this place. But the forest seemed to shift around me like a living thing. Every direction looked the same. Endless pines stretching toward a canopy so thick it blocked out most of the sky. When I finally stopped, gasping and disoriented, I found myself in a small clearing I didn't remember entering. In the center stood a single pine tree, perfectly straight and massive, easily 8 feet in diameter. Nailed to its trunk at eye level was a large mirror, maybe 2 feet across, with an ornate silver frame that belonged in a Victorian mansion. not the Arizona wilderness. This mirror was different from the others. Instead of reflecting the clearing behind me, it showed the interior of my RV. I could see my coffee cup still sitting on the dinette table, my paperback book folded open beside it. Everything exactly as I'd left it that morning. But I wasn't alone in the reflection. A figure sat at my table, back turned toward the mirror. The person was wearing my clothes, the blue hiking shirt and khaki pants I had on, but something about their posture was wrong. Too rigid, like a mannequin arranged in a sitting position. As I watched, the figure slowly turned around to face the mirror. It was me, but not me. The face was my face, but the eyes were completely black. Not just the irises, but the entire visible portion, as if they'd been filled with ink. The thing that looked like me smiled with too many teeth, all of them sharp as needles. It raised one hand and waved at me through the mirror. I stumbled backward, tripped over a root, and fell hard on my tailbone. When I looked up, the mirror showed only my own reflection again. Shocked and pale, but recognizably human. The clearing behind me was empty. I got to my feet and ran again, this time following what looked like a game trail through the thickest part of the forest. Branches tore at my clothes and face, but I didn't slow down until I emerged onto a dirt road that had to lead back to civilization. Except it was the same road I'd driven in on the night before. I could see tire tracks from my RV in the sandy dirt, and there, about a quarter-mile away, was Pine Shadow RV Park. But something was wrong with the campground. From a distance, it looked normal. The same scattered RV sites, the same picnic tables and fire rings. But as I got closer, I realized it was like looking at a photograph of the place rather than the place itself. The colors were too saturated, the shadows too sharp. Everything had a brittle, artificial quality that made my teeth ache. And there were people in the campground now. I could see figures moving between the sites, at least a dozen of them, maybe more. They walked with purpose, setting up tents and arranging camping gear with mechanical precision. But something about their movements was wrong. They were too synchronized, like dancers following choreography rather than people going about normal camping activities. I crept closer, using the pine trees as cover. The figures were all wearing my clothes. Not similar clothes, but exact duplicates of my blue hiking shirt and khaki pants. They all had my face, my height, my build. A campground full of Derek Spencers, each one performing a different aspect of camping like actors in some elaborate play. One, Derek was building a campfire, arranging logs in a perfect teepee pattern. Another was hanging laundry on a line strung between two trees. A third sat at a picnic table, reading what looked like my paperback thriller. They moved without speaking, without acknowledging each other's presence. At the center of the campground, in Site 47, where I'd parked my RV, sat an identical Winnebago Vista. Same color, same model, same dent in the rear bumper from where I'd backed into a post at my apartment complex 3 months earlier. But the RV was surrounded by mirrors, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, hanging from every available surface. They covered the windows, reflected off the chrome bumpers, turned the entire vehicle into a glittering kaleidoscope that hurt to look at directly. The Derek figures moved around it like pilgrims circling a shrine. Their reflections multiplied infinitely in the overlapping glass. I backed away from the campground, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of hallucination, a break from reality brought on by stress and isolation. People didn't get copied. Entire campgrounds didn't get replaced by elaborate duplicates. But as I watched, one of the Derek figures turned and looked directly at me through the trees. It had the black eyes from the mirror, and when it smiled, I could see all those needle-sharp teeth. It raised one hand and waved. Then all of them turned to look at me. I ran deeper into the forest, crashing through underbrush with no plan except to get away from the campground and the things that wore my face. Behind me, I could hear them moving through the trees, not running, but walking with that same mechanical precision, following me with implacable patience. The afternoon sun was sinking toward the horizon, turning the forest into a maze of long shadows and golden beams. I had no idea which direction I was heading, no landmarks to guide me. Every tree looked the same. Every path led deeper into the wilderness. I found myself in another clearing, this one larger than the first, with a small creek running through the center. The water was clear and cold, and I knelt to drink from it, cupping the liquid in my shaking hands. It tasted like metal and pine needles. When I looked up, I saw my reflection in the creek's surface, but it wasn't moving in sync with me. While I knelt motionless by the water's edge, my reflection continued drinking, tilting its head back and forth like a bird. When I slowly raised my hand, the reflection remained bent over the creek. When I stood up, it stayed kneeling. I stepped back from the creek, but my reflection remained by the water, now looking up at me with those terrible black eyes. It opened its mouth and spoke, though no sound reached my ears. I could read its lips clearly. "You can't leave." The sun was setting fast now, painting the forest in shades of red and orange that reminded me uncomfortably of blood. I needed to find shelter, somewhere safe to wait out the night and figure out how to escape this place. But everywhere I looked, I saw mirrors glinting between the trees like watching eyes. They were everywhere now, not just hanging from branches, but embedded in tree trunks, growing out of the ground like metallic flowers, reflecting the dying light in 1,000 fragmenting angles. And in each one, I could see different versions of myself. Derek figures with black eyes, Derek figures with too many teeth, Derek figures whose movements were just slightly wrong, like marionettes controlled by an amateur puppeteer. I stumbled through the forest as darkness fell, guided only by moonlight filtering through the canopy. The Derek figures were still following me, but they'd stopped trying to hide. I could see them moving parallel to my path, staying just at the edge of vision. Whenever I looked directly at one, it would stop and wave with that horrible artificial smile. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed as unreliable as everything else in this place. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and beginning to hallucinate, or at least I hoped what I was seeing were hallucinations. The mirrors were multiplying, covering every surface like some kind of reflective fungus. They showed me versions of myself from different angles, different times, different possibilities. In one mirror, I saw myself as a child, crying in a corner while my parents fought in the background. In another, I was elderly and gray, sitting alone in a nursing home. A third showed me lying in a hospital bed, machines beeping around me while a doctor spoke quietly to my sister. The mirrors were showing me my entire life, past and future, real and imagined. And in every reflection, no matter how young or old, no matter what circumstances surrounded me, I had those black eyes. I'd always had them. That's when I understood the truth that my conscious mind had been refusing to accept. This wasn't some supernatural encounter with doppelgangers or mirror creatures. This was recognition. The things in the forest, the Derek figures with their mechanical movements and needle teeth, they weren't copies of me. I was a copy of them. The real Derek Spencer had died in this forest, probably years ago. Maybe he'd been hiking alone, maybe camping, maybe just driving through and decided to stop for the night. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that something in the Mogollon Rim had taken his form, his memories, his life, and sent the copy back into the world to live out an artificial existence. I thought about my life over the past few years, the growing anxiety, the sense of disconnection from other people, the feeling that I was going through the motions of being human without ever quite getting it right. How long had I been a reflection? How many other people in my life were copies, duplicates, things wearing human faces like ill-fitting masks? The Derek figures had stopped following me. They stood in a rough circle around the clearing I'd stumbled into, their black eyes reflecting moonlight like animals. But they weren't threatening anymore. They were welcoming me home. In the center of the clearing stood the largest mirror I'd seen yet, a massive sheet of silvered glass at least 10 feet tall, held upright by a frame made from what looked like human bones. My reflection filled the entire surface, but it was wrong in every way possible. The Derek in the mirror was rotting, flesh hanging in strips from a skull that showed through gaps in what remained of his face. Maggots writhed in his eye sockets. His mouth was a lipless grin full of broken teeth. This was what I really looked like. What I'd always looked like, underneath the illusion. The mirror Derek opened its mouth and spoke, its voice finally reaching my ears like wind through dead leaves. Time to come home. I stepped toward the mirror, my reflection moving to meet me from the other side. Our hands touched the glass at the same moment, and I felt the surface give way like water. My fingers passed through, then my hand, then my entire arm. Behind me, the Derek figures began to clap with slow, mechanical precision. The sound echoed through the forest like breaking bones. I stepped through the mirror. I'm back in my RV now, parked in Site 47 at Pine Shadow RV Park. According to my phone, it's Saturday morning, and I've been here for 2 days. I don't remember driving back to the campground. I don't remember anything after stepping through the mirror except a sensation of falling through endless silver space. But I'm home now. Everything is exactly as it should be. The anxiety attacks have stopped. I feel calmer than I have in years, more centered, more complete. When I look in the bathroom mirror, I see my normal face looking back. Tired, but human. Recognizably Derek Spencer. No black eyes, no needle teeth, just me. Except when I'm not looking directly at it. I catch glimpses of my true reflection sometimes, in peripheral vision or in windows that reflect at just the right angle. The rotting thing with maggot-filled eyes, the corpse wearing my identity like a stolen coat. But when I turn to look directly, it's always just my normal face again. I packed up the RV this morning and drove back to Tucson. The trip down from the rim was uneventful. No GPS glitches, no strange voices, no impossible campgrounds full of copies. Just a peaceful drive through beautiful country. I'm back at work now, managing the warehouse, dealing with inventory and shipping schedules and all the mundane details of human existence. My coworkers say I seem more relaxed, more focused. My supervisor complimented me on my improved attitude. I'm better at being Derek Spencer now than I was before. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers coming from my bathroom mirror. And when I drive past reflective surfaces, store windows, polished car doors, puddles in parking lots, I catch glimpses of other versions of myself looking back. Different clothes, different ages, different circumstances, but always the same black eyes. How many Derek Spencers are there? How many reflections of reflections, copies of copies, all living out artificial lives in a world that grows more filled with mirrors every day? I don't know. And the really terrifying part is, I'm not sure I care anymore. The whispers are getting louder. They're calling me back to the forest, back to the clearing with the bone-framed mirror. They say there are others like me who need to come home, other copies who've forgotten what they really are. I think I'm going to listen to them. Next weekend, I'm planning another RV trip. Back to the Mogollon Rim, back to Pine Shadow RV Park. I know exactly how to find it now, even though it's not on any official campground maps. The road will appear when I need it to, just like it did before. And maybe this time, I won't come back alone. If you're reading this, if you found this account on my laptop or printed out in my apartment, then something went wrong. Maybe the real Derek Spencer was stronger than I thought. Maybe some part of him survived in me long enough to leave a warning. Or maybe this is just another layer of the deception, another reflection in an endless hall of mirrors. Don't trust your reflection. Don't go camping alone in the Mogollon Rim. And if you see mirrors hanging in the forest, if you hear voices that sound like your own, if you find a campground that's not quite right, run, and don't look back. Because something in the woods is copying, and it's getting better at being you than you are. This account was found on a laptop in the abandoned Campsite 47 at Pine Shadow RV Park by Arizona Department of Public Safety officers conducting a welfare check. The registered owner of the campsite, Derek Spencer, age 34, of Tucson, Arizona, has not been seen since October 15th. His RV was found empty with no signs of struggle. The campground has been temporarily closed pending investigation. Investigating officers report that Site 47 contained numerous mirrors of unknown origin hanging from surrounding trees. These mirrors have been removed and are being held as evidence. Several officers have reported seeing unusual reflections in the mirrors that do not correspond to their actual positions or appearances. Anyone with information regarding the whereabouts of Derek Spencer should contact the Navajo County Sheriff's Office immediately. Do not approach the subject if sighted, as his mental state is unknown. The laptop also contained 127 photographs of mirrors taken throughout the Mogollon Rim area. Digital analysis reveals unexplained figures in the background of every image. These figures appear to be wearing Derek Spencer's clothing and bear his physical features. Pine Shadow RV Park is not listed in any official campground directories and does not appear on USFS permit records. The land appears to be public forest with no designated camping facilities. Investigation is ongoing.